Good evening, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, part of the Cover One Sports Network, and the only podcast in existence, I promise you, I swear by it, that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2 underscores, A-N-T. Give me a follow on the old Twitter and follow on the old TikTok as well. Same exact handle, pro, 2 underscores, A-N-T. Pretty much use the TikTok for film clips and video breakdowns, similar to what I do on Twitter, with an equal amount of chicanery and tomfoolery in both. In tonight's episode of Disguised Coverage, we've had this running theme for the last several weeks. And I'm joined tonight again by Kendall Mirsky, because what we've done here these last several weeks on Disguised Coverage, Kendall, and part of the reason, other than you being fantastic, but part of the reason why I've continued to have you back is, I appreciate this comment from Michael in the intro saying, hey, Ann, thanks for the blueberries. That's fantastic. Part of the reason I continue to have you back is we've gone over several things throughout this entire offseason that have pertained to training camp, the preseason, and then the regular season in sequential order. And as we move forward here, these last several weeks, we started to tie up these loose ends and bring a lot of these concepts and these ideas full circle. And Kendall, you are back here tonight to talk about some of the most important Buffalo Bills storylines coming into this 2022 regular season, but also talk about it in the scope of our top training camp storylines episode that we did. So I'm very excited to have you back. How you feeling?
Good. I mean, happy to have some closure on the preseason in terms of, roster battles and knowing how everything's going to shake out from that perspective, seeing a little bit of the offense, seeing a little bit of the defense. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Jowl's a liar.
Well, I mean, maybe to you means a lot.
Everyone. Everybody in the chat. You can't see all the comments, but everybody's in the comments being like, oh, no, that's not true. Jowl, stop lying. Kendall's terrible. You can't see him because you're not the host.
They're blocking me or something.
But I can see him. So I just wanted to let you know.
I am happy to get some answers, though, on a lot of the things that we just kind of knew were murky, things that we knew just kind of needed to play out for us to fully understand them. And I think, as the practice squad is all but set at this point, I think we all have a lot of clarity on the way the Bills want to attack, the way the Bills want to defend, the way they want to deploy their personnel, all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, we don't have the full picture, but I think we're getting closer, and I think that much is exciting.
Yeah, it's. I got a time out here. Jessica says last night for the tree. It's not the last night for the tree. This tree, August tree.
She gets it.
She does get it. Last night for the August tree. Next week, it'll be September. Regular season tree will start, combined with being a September tree. Yes, I like where Jessica's head is at here. Yeah, it's a fun time. And what I'm excited for in tonight's episode is, I think this one really, we've talked about so many pieces when it's come to the Buffalo Bills offseason and potential regular season, whether it's been players, whether it's been scheme, structure, X's and O's, film, things on a macro level, micro level, wide scale, granular, a variety of things. I feel like this episode is a nice culmination of all of it. And, again, rather than doing like a preview show or like a roster this, I think it's a nice summation of a lot of the work that we've put in. This is also kind of like a bit of a cross show episode because of some of the things that we'll talk about tonight. We've talked about in the film room and shown in the film room. So I think it's a nice way to, again, to use a wrestling term, I think we got some nice long-term booking happening for tonight's episode. And that's part of what we are going to dive into in tonight's episode. For those of you that are here now live in this episode, please drop a like on this video. If you are watching later, listening later, whatever have you, please drop a like as well. I know it's corny, and I know I say this every week, and I know that I say that every week as well, but it goes a tremendously long way towards helping us to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears, both for this show, for Cover One, and the channel and the team as a whole. So please drop a like on this video if you are here on YouTube. If you are listening on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review. Drop a legitimate review, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Give some real feedback if you like to. Your likes, your dislikes. If you think Kendall's terrible and you don't want to see him back, give that review.
Let us know that.
Yes, and I'll be like, Kendall is, I'll 86 him and take him out real quick. But any and every ounce of support is greatly appreciated. And we appreciate everybody being here live in tonight's episode. And part of that, of you guys being here, guys and girls being here live with us tonight, as we do here on this show, So Kendall and I are going to go through. First, we're going to talk about some of our training camp storylines and where we are now on those training camp storylines now that we're out of training camp and out of the preseason. Talk about where we are with those, how they potentially relate to our 2022 regular season most important Buffalo Bills storylines. But within that whole time, with the live chat, as we do here, what are your top storylines to watch for? What do you think about the storylines that Kendall and I have? We're going to go from, we each have our top three. We're going to go 3, 2, 1. What do you think of each of them for us? What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What are your comments? What's your third most important? What's your second? What's your first? Anything and everything. You know how much we love the live engagement and the chat, the banter back and forth. Even just when I'm talking now, I can see the chat still like going up to the right there. So I love the engagement that you folks have going on with each other, and we appreciate the engagement with ourselves as well. So keep those thoughts flowing. Questions for us, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, whatever you got, throw them up into the chat and we will get to them as much as physically possible. As you know, super chats get priority. 1, because we respect the monetary donation. 2, because the color attracts our eyes and we'll pull it up right away. It'll get automatic priority. We'll stop everything that we're doing, pull it up, answer it, acknowledge it, whatever have you. Kendall, as I mentioned, let's talk about some of our top training camp storylines coming into this episode. I don't want to give away too much for what our most important storylines are for the 2022 regular season, but when looking at your top training camp storylines, how does that list compare to where you're at mentally now going into the regular season? Were some of your questions answered? Do you have further questions about those questions? Do you have new ones? Like, how much have you kind of strayed or stayed on the path when it came to where you were before training camp in the preseason versus where you are now?
I think it's funny because I think the best way I can put this, it's going to be a visual, but I'm still on the same path. Before, the path was really, really wide, right? Okay. But now as I'm getting answers, that path narrows and kind of corrects itself into the direction that
that's a good metaphor.
See it going. Yeah. So, I mean, in training camp storylines, I talked about the D-line. I talked about Kyer Elam. I talked about slot wide receivers. Those are all part of my top 3 storylines, but it's much different, the scope of it now. Now it's like, yeah, I do have a lot more answers in all 3 of those regards. So now my questions are even further down the road or further down that path because I got answers during the shallow portions of that path. So it is funny how it has kind of evolved from, just trying to get basic answers to basic questions at the beginning. And now that we're past that point of the preseason, you kind of get even deeper and you get to wonder what is there next for this specific storyline, this specific path.
I like that a lot. I don't know if it qualifies as a metaphor or an analogy, but I love it. That's very well played by you. I'm in a similar boat, but I think I've leaned a little more towards having some of my initial training camp storylines answered. Got to stop. I just said it. We know the rules. Jessica, you are a constant supporter and engager here on the show. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your just general presence and for the super chat and for the comment as well. Ooh, Jessica's looking forward to 2023. And she says, is Babylon Spectre, aka Balin Spectre, but known as Babylon in these parts, is he a Tyler Medikevich replacement for 2023? Kendall, as you start to look up Medikevich's contract, I am going to kick it to you after you do that because Spectre is somebody who he got your game ball a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, week 1 game ball.
Week 1 against the Colts. He's somebody who we've highlighted in a variety of ways in the film room and on this show as well and on Twitter. Somebody who shined a bit from time to time. He's also had his struggles, but he's shown well. He makes this team. Who knows if he does, if Andre Smith doesn't have that suspension and there's the murkiness involved. But as somebody who is a self-proclaimed Babylon Spectre fan, do you see him potentially being a Tyler Medikevich replacement in 2023?
I think it's possible. I think it was some potential foresight from Brandon Beane. Now looking at the contract, this is Tyler Medikevich's last year in Buffalo, at least in terms of his term.
In terms of term.
But who knows? I mean, if he performs well this year, this will be his year 30 season. I don't think it's crazy to assume that they'd want to re-sign him for year 31 and 32. But again, talking out of both sides of my mouth,
He is a top special teams player. He's elite when
exactly.
it comes to special teams.
If he shows no drop off, like I would
Yes.
understand why he would want to or Bean would want to
I
re-sign.
think he's like led special teamers and tackles like 2 out of the last 3 years or multiple years in a row. He's also he might be more. He's also the personal protector on punt team, and he gets everybody set and adjusts things. He's a force on kick coverage. Like he's genuinely, I was going to say genuinely, that's not going to work. Genuinely a valuable piece on special teams.
And that's why it gives me pause to say that Spector is the replacement. But I think it's foolish to kind of invalidate that thought, because why else would Brandon Bean take 2 linebackers in this draft? You know, one could be a depth piece, one could be a replacement, or you're just taking 2 stabs at the same potential spot. But either way, I think because both of them made the roster at this point, whether you want to bring Andre Smith into this or not, I do think that was a little bit of foresight from Brandon Bean, knowing that, you know, linebacker is a special teams heavy position, especially on the depth side of things. So, yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know if it's necessarily probable. I think it's very dependent on a lot of factors. If Andre Smith gets back on this team, how Spector's performing while Smith is suspended, how Medikevich performs throughout the entire season. So it has a lot of dependent variables. But I think Jessica's onto something. It's possible.
I'm not ready to make the commitment yet because 1, we haven't seen enough from Spector in real NFL games. 2, I genuinely value Tyler Medikevich. I think he's fantastic on special teams, and I value special teams a lot. But I think to your point, and I think, you know, to harken it back to Jessica's question, I think it's definitely a possibility. I think when just the way he plays and the way he moves, I think a lot of people kind of just like, oh, he looks like Medikevich, but just in like a bigger version. And I think it's an easy transition for people to make that comparison. I wouldn't rule it out. And I think in a perfect world, if you can get him to function at some kind of that level, but you have him for longer term, you have him for more cost control, like that's a nice piece to have in the bag already. And exactly to your point, Kendall, like I don't think that's something that was lost on Brandon Bean. I think they make picks and moves for the future from a chess piece perspective, like we know, but not just for offense and defense. I think they look at it from a holistic 3-phase, you know, 3-pronged attack, including special teams there. So I definitely think it's a possibility. I don't know how much of a reality it is, but I think it's definitely a possibility for 2023. Especially given, honestly, if Medikevich has another good year, how much salary does he command? I think he's like it's like $3 million this year. And if he's coming back again, how much does he command potentially?
Like, cap is 3.25.
3.25 cap hit. Like if you have to bring him back at somewhere around that level, do you want to for primarily a special teams guy? Or if you've got this cost controlled late round draft pick who can function at some of that level, and then you take that money and do you give it to an offensive lineman, you know, on a 1-year deal to give you some extra depth, or a corner on a 1-year deal for some extra depth, or potentially a wide receiver? Like there's a multitude of options to weigh, but I definitely think it's a possibility. That's a very good question. I also love Ned came through with support as well.
Yeah, so almost beat me.
Almost did. I like that. And it's a good thing to think about when we're getting into this regular season aspect of the Bills and these storylines. And I think it's a nice reminder to not forget about special teams, especially considering what happened in Kansas City towards the end of that year and how special teams play a role no matter what, and how you go into it. To tie it back to, you know, how we're starting to flow into this episode really in the topic, when it came to my training camp storylines where I am at now, several of them were answered for me. I don't want to give them away because they still tie into some of what I'm watching for going forward that we're going to talk about tonight. But I did have some questions answered, not completely, not holistically, but to a point where I feel better, and where some of the storylines, 2 of my storylines that I had coming into training camp have moved down several notches, and I replaced them with other storylines. And I think that's a very encouraging thing. I think I'm a harsh grader. I'm a pessimist. I'm constantly paranoid as a Bills fan and as a Red Sox fan. Even though the Red Sox have won several World Series in my lifetime now, I still am just, between growing up as a Red Sox and Bills fan, I just always feel like the rug is always going to be pulled out from under me. I am confident in absolutely nothing. Because of that, I think it's part of the reason why I'm so objective, and also why I'm closer. If I had to be between pessimistic and optimistic, I think I'm more pessimistic. But I think that objectivity comes from just not ever getting too high on anything and staying grounded in realism in order to not have your heart crushed and broken if you get let down and disappointed. And so I'm excited that I came into training camp with several legitimate questions and valid questions, and some of them were answered already. And that makes me feel better about this team and this roster as we go forward. I see Justin's comment. I want to let Justin know he can go kick rocks. Andrew, you can kick rocks as well. To each their own.
I love the energy
you do
from the chat.
Yeah, but kick rocks. Have fun. Honestly, like I'm so cool. I never thought the Red Sox would win one World Series, and they won 4 since 2004. Like, I'm good for forever. Like, I'm fine.
I wish more Boston fans were like you. They could be satisfied with this. This recent stretch has been great. Well, I mean, that too. That's part of it.
I'm not like, listen, it's the same thing with the Bills. If the Bills were a dynasty and won like 4 Super Bowls, I'd be thrilled. I just want one. Just give me one. I'm not greedy. I don't need this 15-year dynasty. If we got it, would I take it? Absolutely.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Like, I just want one. Just give me one. Yeah. Like that's it. And yeah, the Red Sox got 4, and I've seen some amazing comebacks and series and playoff moments in baseball that'll forever stay with me. I got nothing to complain about. And so, yeah, so I still hate the Yankees, but you Yankee fans do you. As we shift gears now in this episode, I know everybody was thinking like, oh, they're going to talk about the content. False. I'm going to talk about the sponsor real quick. You should have seen it coming. Sponsored by One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, hands down. The online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms that you are listening to. You got the address there, the phone number, online menu, anything and everything. Fantastic sweet sauce pizza that they pride themselves on. Great cheese to sauce ratio, cup of char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. I love seeing comments and testimonials that come through from people here in the chat to be like, well, I was in Buffalo, I had some, or you know what, I got some last week and it was the best. I appreciate all of you people for doing that. Also, they're genuinely good people. Like, as I mentioned every week, the 3 I always go to, partnering with Roswell to try and knock out cancer, partnering with the Alzheimer's Foundation, partnering with the SPCA, partnering with Toys for Tots come the holidays. They just do a lot of good for the community, and they make a tremendously tasting product. Treat yourself and the family to some One Pie Pizza. Again, the online menu can be found here in the episode show notes, whether on YouTube or anywhere on the podcasting apps or platforms. Jessica says the Red Sox still have 20-plus World Series to catch the Yankees. That is true. Most of the Yankees World Series came when there was about 3 teams in baseball, though. So not to not value those, but I think it's a little different. But to each their own. Again, it is what it is. Let's shift focus to the most important storylines for the Buffalo Bills here in 2022. And the way, again, before actually Kendall and I dive into it, again, those of you playing at home, let us know if you agree with our storylines, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything like that. What are your most important storylines to watch for? What are you excited about? What are you concerned about? And that's part of what shaped our answers tonight. They can fall into any category. It could be an individual player. It could be a position grouping. It could be an entire side of the ball. It could be one specific aspect. It could be as micro or as macro as you want. What do you have your eyes on? What are you focused on? And again, it could be positive or negative. It could be something you're excited to see and you're eagerly anticipating for a good reason, or something you're dreading and concerned about because you don't have faith and you're worried and concerned. There's a lot of ways in which this can go. So again, those of you at home, let us know what you got going on, what you think about our list. We're going to go from here. Again, we are going to go from 3 to 2 to 1, build the suspense, build the anticipation. So Kendall, what is your number 3 most important Buffalo Bills storyline for 2022?
Number 3, kind of an extension of number 3 before, but it's a little bit more narrowed, as I explained. It's the impact of the interior defensive lineman in the run game.
Oh, okay.
And how that changes things. And it's a little bit macro, but also comes back to micro. It kind of stems from how wide the front is going to be aligned and the frequency of that after adding Von Miller. I don't know how often we'll see it. I don't know if the Bills will be smart and try to get wider on only passing downs exclusively, or if, they'll just do it generally because they want to get wider. And that's the philosophy of the defense moving forward. I don't know. But speaking on that, those wide alignments, with that, it's going to come more run gap responsibility for everyone, because you're making those bubbles bigger on the front. You're making those bubbles for the offense much more enticing to run
That big
through.
gap bubble becomes juicy.
Yeah, and it puts a lot of stress and strain on the edge guys, the interior guys, and the linebackers, everyone in that front. So I'm very curious how they're going to hold it down. Obviously, we've talked about how those interior defensive linemen, we're assuming they're going to play a little bit more gap and a half type of play up front, and hopefully keep those linebackers a little bit cleaner, allow them to
watch them not do that at all.
Exactly. But that's the thing. This is the thought. And this is why I think it's a huge storyline, because that's what we're anticipating. But will we get it? Or are we just going to get wider and keep the same principles that we saw last year, just to aid in pass rush, but potentially mitigate run stopping efficiency? So it's all very interesting. But regardless of all of that, like, even if the Bills are smart about it and they're not wide on rushing downs, and they're very smart about staying compact on rushing downs and all of that, I'm still really focused on how those three new interior defensive linemen, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, and Jordan Phillips, how they impact the second level, keep those guys clean, and allow them to play fast and free. But wrinkling in the wide front, I think that will be interesting to see how the Bills use that specifically on run versus pass downs.
What do you anticipate the interior defensive line rotation looking like? Do you know, we've talked about it multiple times, and I think you were the one who first said it on air.
Number 3 storyline, yeah.
And then as we've gone through the offseason and training camp, you know, we've talked about this idea of like the hockey line type of rotation along the entire front, not just the interior. But when it comes to that rotation, how do you see it playing out? Do you think it's matchup based? Do you think there's a clear line 1 and line 2? And is there any mixing and matching? Is it pure stick with 1 and 2 and matchup based? Like, how do you see that rotation potentially playing out? Given that it's, your number 3 storyline.
I think it is going to be matchup based, as I think most things are going to be for this team this year. But I think we're going to see Daquan Jones exclusively with the ones more than Settle and Phillips. That's just my gut at this point, based on what we saw in the preseason, the fact that we didn't see him a lot. And when we saw him, it was with the ones for a short time in the second game against Denver. So that kind of leads me to believe that Daquan Jones is going to be that guy next to Ed Oliver, and kind of use him in a similar way to how they use Starr, in the sense that he is the starter, but it's specifically on rundowns. And that's kind of where the matchup base comes in, where it's not necessarily the team you're going up against, but also the situation of the team you're going up against. So, if it's a rundown, you're obviously going to see Daquan Jones if he's fresh. But once you get to third down, just because Daquan Jones is the first stringer, I don't think you see him in the game with Ed Oliver at the same time pass rushing. I think that's where you see Jordan Phillips come in, or maybe even Tim Settle. But I view Jordan Phillips as the best pass rushing interior guy of those 3 additions.
It's a question for you, and because I have an answer on this question, but Ned doesn't care about my answer. He cares about yours, because he directed this question towards you. Ned says, Kendall, if the D-line makes changes as you anticipate, would it increase our opportunities to blitz?
I personally think our opportunities to blitz is going to be more dependent on coverage than it is on D-line play. I think if the Bills want to get to more man coverage stuff, I think it allows them to blitz more. It allows the linebackers to kind of key in on what the running backs and tight ends are doing in terms of pass protection, if they're checking and releasing, if they're staying in, if they're going straight into a route, whatever it is. I think it kind of allows them to read and react and play downhill if they have to, and get to the quarterback if they see the opportunity. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be more design stuff, just because of how the D-line presents itself. Because I think with wider alignment, you put a lot of strain on offensive linemen, especially when you have Von Miller really wide out to that side. It puts that guard and tackle on that side in a lot of stress, being like, he could go anywhere from this. Like, yeah, it's probably easiest to go around the outside shoulder, but he could probably stunt this back inside, and then you got to overcompensate for that. So I think it's more about how they want to get into pass rushing things with just 4 guys, and try to limit the amount of time that they're sending more than 4 guys, so they can drop 7 into coverage as much as possible. But I do think man coverage is potentially their answer to blitz or rush more than 4.
I see it going with it, you know what, it's interesting, and I was looking up the numbers while you were talking there. I didn't realize the Bills were this high in, I mean, not high, but they were 17th in blitz percentage last year at 23%. So again, not a ton, 1 on every 5, but 17th is a little higher than I thought. I actually think just from an overall blitz perspective, regardless of alignment up front, I feel like in an ideal world, Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier, they want this Bills defense to be the Carolina defense that went to the Super Bowl against Denver, where they're ideally relying on the front 4 to generate pressure, and they're consistently dropping 7. If they can drop 8, I think they would also potentially love to do that. And I think Von Miller is a step in that direction because you have a legitimate edge presence now potentially paired with Ed Oliver, who was a game wrecker inside last year, and people don't really know about it, combined with potentially Gregory Rousseau being a force off the edge and any one of the other rotational players that are coming in on the front 4. I think you might see less blitzing this year, but I'm very interested to see, to go to Ned's question and to your point, because part of what I think is really exciting, you could get real creative with some of these blitzes, especially if you start to run some overload type looks and you run the overload away from Von Miller.
Right.
And you make that offensive line have to decide, do we have somebody good enough to play Von Miller one-on-one? Like, do we have to help Von Miller, or do we have to provide help to the overload side? And any level of stress that you could put on the offensive line, or the Bills love to use simulated pressures all the time, showing those overload looks and then dropping out of it, not even necessarily having to bring them, which the Bills love to do. There is a lot of aggressive nature in Leslie Frazier when it comes to the games that he plays and showing pressure and bringing it versus bringing it with a simulated pressure versus showing it and dropping out, mugging those A gaps and playing games with the offense. I think this isn't one of my storylines, but it's something I have my eye on because the presence of Von Miller allows you so many more potential opportunities up front. Again, whether you're playing games with blitzes or if you're just, I guess, more like conventional or boring, and it's just like, no, we're going to rush 4 and drop 7 into coverage and see what happens. I am interested to see which dials they turn up and how. For me, I think based on what McDermott and Frazier have done in the past and what they ideally want to go with, I think they dial down overall the blitz rate. I think they could use it based on some designer situations like third downs when you can really kind of get into some looks and things you want to do. Or based on matchup, like we know, but I think you'll see that dial turn down a little bit. And I am very, do we have potentially some breaking news? Sam Martin, punter from the Denver Broncos, signed with the Buffalo Bills. Is that what's going down? Is that what the chat's saying? Streets is talking. Is that what the streets is saying? I love that phrase. I'm just going to keep saying it. Streets is talking. Is that what's going down? I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Peter Schrager.
Schrags reported it.
Yeah.
Man, we just break news all day. Von Miller signing happened while Disguise coverage was live. Sam Martin, punter news while Disguise coverage is live. Man, the streets is talking about us. That's what it is. That's funny. Spin says Matt Barkley signed as our punter.
That would be
funny.
Wild.
Hey, man, then you're running some tricky fourth down stuff with a punter who can also throw. Like, I don't know. Are you getting to some kind of spread offense? Do you
know that Sam Martin can't throw?
That's also true. Do we know that? We don't know that. Like, this is what we're changing the show to this. Nicholas is on it. C1 breaking news with Kendall and Ant. Why is Kendall before Ant?
Because I've been there every time we've broken news.
Fair point. I like where your head's at. Well played. See, that's why you're first. You earned it. It was a test.
Change the context, though, and I might not be first. If we're not talking about breaking news.
Now we need to do a most important Disguise coverage storylines for the 2022 season because, man, look at the avenues that we could potentially go down. I like that, though, from you. The defensive line rotation in general, for me, I think eyes on the defensive line. One of my top training camp storylines was the emergence of a secondary edge rusher. I knew we had Von Miller. I knew Ed Oliver would be a force in the interior. I wanted to see who could provide some juice on the outside.
I take it you feel better about Greg Rousseau at this point?
I do. I feel better about Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. I think AJ Epinesa, again, he had a really good preseason and training camp last year. This year, I think he's built upon that and showed some more sustainability in his game. And it's not a pass rushing piece, but his presence on the edge versus the run and setting the edge and being a force player, I was really impressed with. He did not have that in his game last year, and he showed more of it this year. So I am more holistically confident in AJ Epinesa. But yeah, Greg Rousseau, and I don't know if it's the effect of Von Miller. I don't know if it's what he said coming into OTAs, which was his focus coming into this year was pass rush moves and pass rush plan and counters and setting players up with moves in the first half that he could come back to and close them out with later in the game and playing mind games. I don't know if it's as simple as he likes being in a 2-point stance, and now that he's rushing from a 2-point stance, like he's much more comfortable like he was at Miami, but he just looks like a different rusher. I saw it in the scrimmage firsthand. I saw it a couple times in practice and training camp, but the scrimmage was more closer to live reps. He looked in sync with his movement, his steps combined with his hand usage, combined with his body position. His hands weren't out in front of his feet. His feet weren't ahead of his hands. He wasn't out of sync. It was almost like comparing it to, a hitter in baseball. You want to bring that momentum and that power through in your swing. You don't want your hands to be out in front too much. You don't want to lead too much with your hips. You want that transference of power as you go through. And he had that in the edge. He hit the edge on an arc, or in his arc, I should say, several times that it was so clean and it was so pretty. And you combine that with some of the technique pieces and the physical aspects that he had, which he won with last year. He won with just size and power. So I do feel a little better about the edge rush from a secondary perspective. Knock on wood, Vaughn is going to be the primary guy on the edge. If he is the prince that was promised, he should be that. So Ed Oliver, for me, is still the second best pass rusher on this team. All you have to do is just have somebody to provide some pop on the edge, whether it's Groot, whether it's Epinesa, even potentially Boogie Basham, maybe even Shaq Lawson, with some grit
and a little bit.
Two-man game. Yeah, he has shown a little bit. He's also he can get home potentially on some twists and some games that you run on the outside, and he and Jordan Phillips are so good with that. And you pair him with some games with Ed Oliver in terms of who's the spiker and who's the looper, and really could be some fun things. So I feel a little better on the edge. So no defensive line pieces made my top 3 most important storylines. But my number 3 storyline for the Buffalo Bills in the regular season in 2022, it's the offensive line, both in terms of pass protection and in terms of run blocking. So the offensive line holistically. We've talked about it in positive ways last year. Josh Allen, his elusiveness in the pocket, his manipulation in the pocket, his pocket presence. Regular season and postseason combined last year in 2021, Josh Allen had the most dropbacks, or had the second most dropbacks under pressure. If you take it from a percentage basis, amongst QBs with at least 20% of dropbacks, which comes out to 141 dropbacks, he was 22nd out of 40 on a percentage level amongst QBs. So again, that's what it kind of puts a little things in a little bit of perspective, because the Bills pass a ton. If you pass more, you increase the volume, you increase the opportunity, you could get pressured, yada, yada, so on and so forth. But the biggest piece, again, so from a volume perspective, second most pressured quarterback in the NFL, 22nd from a percentage standpoint out of 40. But again, of those 40 quarterbacks, he was 40th, meaning good, in the percentage of those pressures that were turned into sacks. So he was the second most pressured quarterback on dropbacks, on a dropback basis last year, but he had the least amount of pressures converted into sacks. Tremendous. His pocket manipulation was amazing last year. We spent an episode in the film room talking about it and showcasing it. His athleticism, his strength, his ability to play quarterback from the neck up, to play mentally, it showed consistently when he faced pressure in 2021. My worry and concern with that is how sustainable is that going forward? How sustainable is it that he is just next level, out of this world, game in and game out, over and over? And also, at least for me, I don't want my quarterback to have to be Batman in the pocket week in and week out. I don't want to have to be like, well, you know what? It's okay. Josh Allen will bail us out.
Yeah, Josh will do Josh.
Yes, I don't want that to be the plan. Like if it works, fantastic. I don't think the sustainability of that is too high. It's the same way for a defense, where a defense who just lives off of turnovers, turnovers aren't consistent year after year. Eventually that starts to regress to the mean a little bit. And if Josh had a wild year from a pressures turned into sacks perspective, like just unbelievable. There's going to be some natural regression to the mean negatively for him. And Josh Allen is the key to this team. This team will go as far as Josh Allen takes them. If the offensive line can't pass protect, it's a concern. We've talked about it several times, Kendall, you and I on the show and in the film room. I think the way the year ended in Kansas City, people forgot about how much the offensive line held this offense back in the first 8-9 weeks of the regular season. And then also from a run game perspective, we've talked about the addition of Aaron Kromer. We've talked about Singletary and Cook and Zach Moss, but so much of this run game piece is going to hinge on the play of the offensive line. Can they execute? How much does Aaron Kromer help? Do they have an identity in the run game like they did in the back end of last year where they found those gap scheme runs? They started running more pin and pulls out of 11 and 10 personnel, or they started running more counters and powers out of 21 personnel with Reggie Gilliam. Do they have that identity? Can they hang their hat on something and help provide a threat in the run and a pivot to the pass game in this offense and make opponents on defense have to honor the run as a legitimate threat? Can they make life easy for Josh Allen by helping to provide a run game that isn't Josh Allen? How do they perform in that area? I think it's and the return on investment the sample size is small at this point. We still don't even know if it's going to be Quessenberry or Spencer Brown starting at right tackle, but we saw some positives that happened when this group played together in that Denver game. And Roger Saffold looked good. We know how good Mitch Morse is. We know how good Deion Dawkins is. We saw really positive flashes from Ryan Bates. But this offensive line, I think across the board, it still has some questions to answer from a longevity standpoint and sustainability standpoint, not to mention the depth behind it. What are you looking at if somebody potentially goes down? I think that's a conversation and a different kind of conversation and a different kind of avenue and longer piece. But yeah, the offensive line is one for me because Josh Allen is so good and the periphery weapons are so potentially good on this team. But if you can't pass protect and you can't run block, it's going to be something that can legitimately hinder and hold back this entire offense. And it's still, at this point, it's a concern because we haven't seen, technically, we don't even know what the starting five is because of that right tackle situation. We don't know what kind of Spencer Brown we're going to get because of how roller coastery and up and down he was last year. I think you honestly, you could make the case that Quessenberry provides a higher floor than Spencer Brown from a known quantity perspective, but the ceiling is obviously much lower. So what do you get from that offensive line? Is it a mixed bag? How mixed is it? Are they a middling offensive line? Are they closer to top 10? Are they closer to the bottom 20? How does Roger Saffold look in pass protection? Does his limited athleticism in pass pro start to show? What type of pass rushes do they struggle against as a unit? And then, function in the run game. Are they able to lean on zone? Are they able to lean on gap? Are they still successful in duo and mixing an outside zone at the same time? Like, who are they? How do they function? That's my third most important Buffalo storyline for 2022.
Yeah, I'm definitely very interested in how the O-line kind of works itself out this year. I think really the only question in terms of personnel is that right tackle spot between Quessenberry and Spencer Brown. But from a effectiveness standpoint, and like you said, longevity and then also identity, like that's the big one for me, that question that is left to be answered. I think we've seen a lot of things from Kromer this year or so far in preseason that it's shown a lack of rigidity, because we know what he came from in LA where he was doing a lot of zone stuff. And I think we've already seen some gap stuff, not a ton overwhelmingly, but we're seeing creativity and a willingness to be flexible in that regard. So I think he's going to play to his personnel, but what does that mean for the entirety of the season? I'm very, very curious to see what that identity he's building is. That is the main thing for me. And obviously, we've been talking about it all off season. Our lack of faith, I guess, is the best way to put it in O-line depth. So if anyone were to go down, what would happen to this team? We don't want to see it as the Josh Allen show in the way where he has to duplicate that kind of escapability from the pocket that he had last year. So I think all of those points are excellent. I'm definitely going to have my eye on the O-line. Teaser O-line did not make my top three, but it has every reason to make my top three. I just prioritized other areas in terms of storylines, but it is absolutely an important one.
Yeah, and I think it's one that I'm leaning more towards the positive in terms of what to expect from this offensive line, but I'm still like I'm watching it
On the
every
edge of
single
your
game.
seat.
Yes, like I will have my eyes focused on every successful run, on every successful pass. I'm going back and looking at what the offensive line
Right.
did, because that sustainability piece is so important to the offensive line. And it's cliche, but football is won in the trenches on the defensive line and the offensive line. And if you can't protect and you can't function in the run game, you've got some issues. And as Michael mentioned in the chat as well, I want to make defenses pay for giving light boxes, something the Bills didn't do last year that we diagnosed early in the offseason, and that Mitch Morse, when he came on the show with us on the film room, said it himself, unprovoked and unprompted. He was like, "Oh, what did you see differently?" And he was like, "Defenses, called our bluff with light boxes, and they dared us to run, and we didn't execute. Like, it is what it is." They need to make defenses punish, and if they can, or they need to punish defenses and make them pay. And if they can, if defenses are scared to play too high and or give you light boxes because your running game is a threat, this offense it's already a problem. It's an even bigger problem because of the threat of that running game paired with Josh Allen in the passing offense. So much can really, be tied back to this offensive line. I like this question from Matt, who says, what will be the Bills' game plan versus LA? And I don't want to be that guy to have to push it forward, but that's what next week's episode is going to be about in disguise coverage. When we focus on regular season disguise coverage, is all about the most important matchups that will decide that week's game, in addition to some potential review from the game before from either a micro and or macro level. But it's going to be a lot of game plan talk week in and week out in terms of those matchups that will decide the game. So I like where Matt's head is at. He seems like a really smart person. So I appreciate him for that comment. Kendall, your number 2 most important Buffalo Bills storyline for the 2022 season. Go.
All right, so I believe my number 2, or it was my number 1 in the preseason, was talking about Kaiir Elam.
Yes.
And this is now a little bit more focused, not on the player, but more on the outcome of the season and how it gets extrapolated and projected that way. I want to see what kind of effectiveness and comfort the Bills defense has in man coverage this year. And I think comfort is really the main word that I want to focus on. Obviously, we all hope that effectiveness is on this team everywhere, that we're efficient everywhere. But comfort, feeling comfortable to call man coverage. If I'm Leslie Frazier, we're lining up in third down, a critical third down, do you feel comfortable calling man coverage? And that's what I'm seeking answers for through this season, especially through the early part. I think the Bills want that freedom to run man without fear of certain concepts getting the better of them. And I think they've been searching for this for a few years now. Bills defense ranked 11th in the league in man coverage usage last season. And I think they may finally have the horses in the stable to feel confident in man coverage. And especially when Trey comes back healthy. I mean, that's completely blown out of the water. Once you get Trey back, I mean, you're talking about Trey, Elam, and Benford, and Dane Jackson. And obviously, we've talked about before how Dane Jackson is probably stronger in zone than he is in man. But I still think you can keep that ship afloat with a combination of Elam, Jackson, and Benford.
That's a good way to put it. Keep the ship afloat. You're not like winning races out there and sailing the seven seas, but you can keep the ship afloat and survive on the water.
And during that time, Leslie Frazier may have some fear to call man coverage in critical high leverage situations because he knows Dane's on the field. Maybe that means Benford comes in for those plays or whatever it means. But either way, I think they want to get towards that. And obviously, we've talked about this all off season, the ability to throw rock, paper, and scissors, throwing something different at the offense to keep the passing game on their toes rather than letting them get in a groove against zone. If you're capable of effectively showing variety of coverages, it can only help. It will never hurt. If you're effective in both man and zone, a variety will only hurt the offense, not your defense.
Talk about it.
I mean, that's all I have. I mean, it's just, it's going to impact the defense positively if they can show that kind of multiplicity and variety in their play calling. And obviously, like I talked about last year, the Bills got more towards man, at least related to their peers in the league. They ranked 11th. So I do think
That was
really good.
That was really good from Pitt. For those who are in the audio
Yeah,
only, the podcasting apps, comment from John came up in regards to Kendall saying rock, paper, scissors. John said, it's not good to throw scissors, Kendall. You know that from school today.
Gotta hold it on the blades. Make sure you're not holding the blades
You
out.
got to get those safety ones, the ones that are like rounded and they're covered with the plastic on the edge. You can't just have like
and
the
you
regular
can't
like
cut anything with them.
Yeah, just construction paper when you cut your numbers out when you learn your numbers and letters.
Oh my god. All right. So back on the rails here. Yeah, I just think the comfort from Leslie Frazier from a play calling standpoint, I think it can really alleviate a lot of things where you feel pigeonholed in certain ways against certain teams, knowing, we're playing the Dolphins twice this year. They got a really fast offense with Waddle, Hill, and I mean, no one really knows what's going on with Gesicki if he's playing inline or not. But
he's not playing inline. Well, I mean, they might want him to play inline.
They're trying to get him to play inline.
He is not built for that world.
No, he's not.
I don't know why he would do that.
Point being, we have a fast offense. So, like, I wonder, will Frazier feel comfortable calling man if Trey isn't healthy for a Dolphins game? That kind of thing. And if we can get closer to that world where Frazier can feel comfortable calling man against any team because he knows he has the horses in the stable to do it, that's only going to be better for our defense.
I'm with you in terms of, actually it's related to my number 2 point, but I just wanted to comment on yours. I think that's so important, that scheme versatility piece. We have talked about it all off season. I love the rock, paper, scissors analogy and the jokes that came with it in the chat, but that's a huge piece for this offense, or this defense, I should say. It's the Bills defense hasn't been a bad defense these last several years, but the problem is they have been vulnerable to certain types of skill sets on offense, and they have been vulnerable based on certain matchups. And those matchups traditionally have been receivers that are either physically dominant because of size and strength, or more of a speed skill set, a la the Tyreek Hill type of speed. And it's just been speed receivers like that in general. They have given the Bills defense problems because this Bills defense is athletic and technically sound, and they're smart and they're well coached, but they're not overly fast as a defense. This isn't a defense filled with burners.
But it's getting faster.
And yes, a little bit. And I think that man zone ratio and usage rate is something to definitely keep an eye on, especially if the preseason is any indication, where we've seen, man, everybody is just roasting you.
I mean, once one happens, everyone jumps on that bandwagon because they see it's only going somewhere good.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I just keep seeing all the comments and they're just like, it's also funny because they're back and forth. It's like, man, like this is how we should play the Rams. And then someone's like, Kendall's a baby. Like, and it's just back and forth, like just absolutely fantastic. Yeah, that man to zone usage ratio, I think, is important. And like I was saying before, I was interrupted by laughter. If the preseason is any indication, seeing that press man on third down capability is a real. I like Earl just comes in and says juice boxes.
That just reminds me of I Love Lamp. Just juice boxes.
Are you just naming things in the room, Brick? Capri Sun. Everybody's just coming through. I gotta stop.
They all get it.
Kendall loves chocolate milk. This is fantastic. Everybody's just it's fantastic. If somebody joined live for the first time now,
I know, right?
What's going on? What is this show about? Are they going to talk about football? Like, what is going on? Yeah, right. Well, Capri Sun. I think they also just got recalled, if I remember correctly. Recently.
Well, my whole world is upside down if that happens. Are you kidding me?
I can't believe. This is a good one. If you haven't, I Love Corn, that kid is a baller. Like once you added like butter as a game changer, and he's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Okay, gotta stop. That if the Bills can work in more man, but especially that press man capability, like we've seen in the preseason, it's another element that we haven't holistically seen. Because even with like I've said several times now, even with Tre'Davious White, when he plays press and he's good at it, he plays it more with his hips. He's not that guy who's coming through and is getting to jam on the receiver and getting really physical at the line. Like his hand usage is there from a technique perspective and a leverage perspective, but he gets into a receiver's kitchen and gets up in him on the line of scrimmage and uses more of his footwork and his hips to control and win in that route, combined with route recognition, anticipation, and all of those things. But having what Elam and Benford have done so far in the preseason with that physicality, like they're up on the line And when the ball is snapped, their hands are immediately getting on the receiver. And it's a variety of receivers. Like we saw it right away against the Colts. Like Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce are big wide receivers. And Elam and Benford brought it to them every single time they went press in a very real way. So I'm very excited to see what that ratio looks like and what that usage looks like. Question from Matt. He says, is there a conclusive timeline for Trey's return? Not completely conclusive. As of now, we know he was put on the PUP. So at a minimum, he's out for the first 4 weeks. Based on the schedule and how things line up and where the bye is, I think realistically, you could see him returning anywhere from week 5 all the way into, week 8 against Green Bay after the bye on Sunday Night Football. I think one of those I think that's the realistic timeline, anywhere from week 5 to 8. But I still think it's going to be closer to 8. My timeline all along has been middle of October as kind of like the safest return date. But I think that one for Green Bay is kind of what I'm earmarking, that return on. It's Sunday night. It's prime time against the Packers after the bye. You get him an extra week of rest. He gets to come out on prime time. There's a multitude of factors. I also think too, I don't think they'll rush him back regardless, but I think it's going to depend on how the Bills play without him. Like if the Bills are rolling hot, they're just going to be like, no, just rest, keep chilling. Like we'll bring you back when we need you. Like the better they're playing, the longer they'll continue to play it cautious and play it safe. But I think they'll err on the side of caution regardless. But very good question from Matt. So yeah, I'm all about the coverage pieces as a storyline in 2022. And it's related to my number 2 storyline.
Nice.
Yes. I went more position group for it. And specific, I kind of went granular with it. My most important Buffalo Bills storyline, the second most important Buffalo Bills storyline is corner 2.
Okay. Yeah.
We've seen the Bills, and this is also related to the scheme versatility and coverage versatility piece that is your number 2, really. We've seen the Bills in back-to-back seasons struggle with certain matchups. They've lacked, you said it already, they've lacked the ability to throw rock, paper, and scissors. And they've come into games where they're not able to throw one of them, and they need to. They come into a game where a team is able to throw paper and they can just throw rock. And it's just like, well, paper beats rock. So hopefully the offense bails us out. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. If it does, hooray. But that just kind of masks over the problem. Kyer Elam, his drafting, taking a corner in round 1 period, let alone one with his skill set. And I never thought I'd see the day, like truthfully. But then also like taking one with his skill set and his traits. That was a move towards remedying those struggles in terms of being able to throw rock, paper, and scissors these past several years. How does he perform as a corner overall? What role or capacity does he, Dane Jackson, and Christian Benford play once Tre'Davious White comes back? Because the corners, and this is a piece too, like actually going back to Matt's question there with Trey's timetable, every cornerback not named Tre'Davious White, every outside cornerback, so not including Karen Johnson, but every corner not named Trey White is going to have to hold it down big time early on this year. The Bills schedule is no joke, let alone the beginning stretch. You come out against the defending Super Bowl champions who have a tremendous quarterback, tremendous weapons on the periphery. Then you go into week 2 against Tennessee. You'll be tested in a different way. How do you hold up against the physicality of Robert Woods and Treylon Burks, the technicality pieces of Robert Woods? How do you function in the run fit against Derrick Henry in that run attack? How do you function against play action and bootlegs and those overs that the Titans are going to want to run with Ryan Tannehill that we saw them go to time and time again? Then you come into week 3, like you mentioned, and everybody's all, Tua can't throw, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, even Cedric Wilson as their number 3 receiver. They have a bit of a squad on the outside and especially very speed heavy. And the Bills secondary is not very speed heavy.
I'm expecting that offense to slap Bills Mafia in the face.
It could potentially happen, especially with how and I'm not saying like there's karma or anything, because every fan base has their subset of fans that are just not tolerable and just very unenjoyable. But Bills fans have just been relentless in mocking Tua at every step of the way. And what I think
haven't been good in a while.
Yeah, that's fair. So finally you're on top and you just want to look down on everyone. But I think what's getting lost in all the Tua jokes and the Tua slander is he doesn't have to be amazing. Got to stop. Super chat from Waterfowl Fanatic. That's very funny. 1, thank you for being here. 2, thank you very much for the donation. 3, kind words and a cool comment. He says, I never thought I'd be hyped about a punter. And then he says, keep up the good work, guys. That's awesome. I I like any type of super chat. I also like any type of any person being here, just the support in general. But it's cool when we get the super chat that is more just a like, here's some money. You guys are fantastic. It warms the heart, but also good comment. Yeah, I'm excited to see what Sam Martin potentially brings. I also want to look at the numbers. I know there was some talking about it in the chat. I want to know what his home and road splits are because of him punting in Denver. Yeah, with that thin air. Is it a little bit of like Colorado Rockies baseball where everybody just hits 50 home runs because the air is so thin and then they go on the road and it's not the same? Very interested. But to go back to that point with Elam and, tying it to Miami as well, lost in all the Tua jokes is he doesn't have to be amazing. He doesn't have to be this great downfield passer. He just has to get the ball into the hands of these playmakers on the outside who are tremendous. Like Jalen Waddle I think he set the record last year for most receptions by a rookie. Granted, you have the extra game. So. Granted, a majority of his receptions came at like an average depth of target of like.
But that's the point.
Yard.
That's the point. Exactly. He doesn't have to make these deep, long progression type of throws. It's just like play within this West Coast offense that McDaniel is making easier on the quarterback.
And exactly like Claude says here, he said, I expect the ball and very quickly on most plays. And that's it. Just get the ball out of your hands to your playmakers. Like, that's it. I know they still have questions on the offensive line, yada, yada. But I think all the Tua jokes and the memes have kind of glossed over the fact that they have some real pieces on that offense. And again, that's just one of the potential teams. It's one of the teams that the Bills are going to face in those first 4 weeks. So that's going to be a stressor. And then you face the Baltimore Ravens, who Rashad Bateman is sweet. And so you got to defend him. And then you have to face this power running attack led by Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense, but also that people forget how good when Lamar is healthy, when that offensive line is healthy, which they are now, how dangerous Lamar is when they go spread. They go 5 wide spread, not necessarily with all wide receivers, but they go 5 out distribution. And what they do is they send their guys. Timeout. We got a super chat. Got to stop. Matt 716. There we go. 1, thank you for being here. 2, thank you for the super chat. 3, Kendall, every time we get one of these, I say it. Do you want to say it?
No, you say it. You got to set the precedence for me.
Matt's comment here is just, hey. And he said, let's go, Buffalo. I appreciate the comment and the super chat and the donation. We had a lot of good energy, feeling a lot of buzz. A lot of questions we're going to get to. Which I can't because we keep getting super chats and that keeps delaying the process here. And then you get the Baltimore Ravens, who, how do you come up in the run fit? How do you measure up with that physicality? But again, like I said, the Ravens, Lamar had crazy good numbers from an EPA perspective and efficiency metrics when spreading out the formation and the route distribution prior to last year before they were hit by the plague. And what the Ravens do is they send their guys out into the route distribution. Lamar either finds them or the check down is Lamar scrambles and is just a better athlete than everybody on the defense, and he gets yards. And he either gets 4 or 5 or he gets 15. He's still a problem. So there's a variety of ways they're going to be tested early on. And then from a long-term perspective, everybody's making jokes about still the Chiefs because Tyreek Hill is gone. The KC offense is still a problem. They still have weapons, and they still present matchup problems. Cincinnati has a squad of weapons on the periphery with arguably the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL with Higgins, Chase, and Tyler Boyd. The Chargers, the weapons that they have, the quarterback that they have. The Broncos, the quarterback and the weapons that they have. The Raiders that they have. All the Raiders with, again, I think people sleep on Derek Carr a little bit, but if you're counting tight ends as trios, Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, and Hunter Renfrow might be the best trio of weapons in the entire NFL. They're fantastic. All these teams with weapons on the periphery that pose a multitude of problems if you lack the versatility to combat what they throw at you. The AFC is loaded. And we also don't know what kind of Trey White is going to come back when he does come back. He needs to be physically and also mentally 100% when it comes to that knee. Playing corner in general, but especially in the NFL, means that knee is going to be under stress all of the time. He needs to be physically 100%, but also mentally. He needs to be confident in knowing, like, I can be shuffling in my back pedal, I can stop and I can plant, I can turn, I can twist. I don't have to worry about if that knee is going to be healthy. When he comes back, is he playing with a brace? Does the brace limit him? Is there any type of hindrance to the normal Trey White that we see? I think that's also a piece as well. I think there's so much assumption of, well, when Trey comes back, and then when Trey comes back
to what we're used to.
Correct. What kind of Trey White are you getting back? Is it what we're expecting? Is it what we've seen before? Is it 90% of Trey White? Is it 80% of the Trey White we've seen? And then how good is that Trey White? That cornerback too, and the cornerbacks in general, play into so much that's going to happen this year. And it also ties into the pass rush. How effective the corners are, specifically that corner too, when Trey comes back. How effective that corner is also ties into how dominant the Bills' front has to be. Does the pass rush have to go Super Saiyan time and time again in order to cover up for the deficiencies or any potential deficiencies or vulnerabilities on the back end? It's all tied to the scheme versatility piece, the health of Trey White, and again, the squad you're going to face in the AFC. The AFC is loaded, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You have to fight fire with fire in a variety of ways. And the Bills last year, at certain points, when they had to fight fire with fire, they fell a little bit short. And yeah, it just changes those dials. If the corners are good, you don't have to rely on the front as much. If the corners are slacking a little bit and they're vulnerable in any way, shape, or form, you have to rely on Von Miller. You have to rely on Ed Oliver. You have to rely on that front to make plays and get home. What dials get turned up? What dials get turned down? Who gets unlocked? How does everybody's jobs get impacted? I think that corner position in general, but specifically corner 2, I think it's the biggest domino effect for this entire defense, positively or negatively. If things go well, the world is the oyster. The world is their oyster defensively. If things don't go well, we're in a similar boat to last year where you're a good defense statistically and efficiency-wise and on tape, but you're going to struggle with certain matchups, and it becomes how much can you mitigate your weaknesses in those matchups instead of being able to be like, well, let's just turn these dials up and we'll be good to go. So corner as a whole, specifically corner 2, is my number 2 piece. I am concerned.
It's
and,
a good
and that's what as well, real quick. Like I'm watching it and I'm also concerned. Not that Elam and Benford haven't played good and I don't like Dane. I think Elam and Benford have progressed through training camp and preseason. I'm much more confident in them now than I was before. But when the bullets start flying in the regular season, it's a different animal. It's a different beast, especially given the competition.
All I was going to add is I haven't really thought about it to this point, but it is really great that the Bills added Von Miller the same year they added rookies to potentially play as CB2.
Excellent point. Helps
potentially
Band-Aids
mitigate
a little bit.
that. Yeah, just kind of mask the learning process a little bit by hopefully making the front better. And that's not just Von Miller too. Obviously, it's those 3 interior defensive linemen we got. The ripple effect of Von Miller making those other young edge guys better. All of that. The front play potentially getting better this year because of all of those additions could also potentially mask the learning process of those young guys on the outside. So I hadn't thought of that to this point. So hopefully that actually comes to fruition.
Some organic thoughts here on disguised coverage. I wanted to get to this comment. Matthew Kulik is killing it tonight. He's doing fantastic. But I like this comment in question. He said, so how do you counter the Miami offense's speed? Do you rely on the D-line breaking Tua? I got 2 thoughts on this one. One, you rely on the pass rush. But from a coverage standpoint, I want to see 2-man, which is man coverage across the board and your safeties up top, splitting the field in half. I want to get into press on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and anybody who is a receiver. I want to get in their face, get into their kitchen, jam them, get physical, change the timing of their routes, change the angles at which they are running their routes, change everything about the route distribution for Tua, make his life harder, and then knowing we can play that coverage because 1, we potentially have some corners who are good at it, but 2, you got these all-pro safeties behind them so that if they don't execute up front and they potentially get beat a little bit and they're vulnerable over the top, you got those 2 erasers on the back end, or even potentially Tremaine Edmonds in the middle with his wingspan and his coverage ability there in the middle. 2-man, I think, is such an ideal. Granted, Casey's O-line was banged up, but the Bucs did it in the Super Bowl. And granted, they were able to get home easily with the front 4 because Casey was playing like their 17th string offensive line. But they went with a lot of 2-high coverages and they went with a lot of 2-man and just played in trail technique or got on top of routes, and the corners knew they had coverage on the back end. So I want to see that defensive front disrupt Tua, it's the easiest, but I want to combine that by giving him no easy options underneath and giving Miami no room to breathe underneath and create explosives underneath or in the intermediate by playing 2-man, mixing up between press and bail, but really just trying to lock down everything on the back end and give Tua no room to breathe, give the receivers no room to operate, give them no opportunity to get going, and then also potentially in conjunction with allowing the defense to get home quickly. You got any thoughts on that?
My main point that I was going to drive home was the press thing and disrupting the timing, because I don't think the D-line can really do anything with a pop gun, quick passing offense like that. There's just no time to get home. I know that the Dolphins O-line is really bad, especially in the past couple of years. But you're still not going to get there if the ball's out in 1.5 seconds. It's just
exactly.
It's almost
if he snaps it and just throws it on a bubble screen or on a drag, or they just run mesh and he just has to keep backing up and drop, like, it's a different piece.
But that's why the press and the disruption of the timing of those routes, it could force him to hold the ball for a second longer, and then you have the potential to get that sack. So that's why I think, like you said too, the mixing up of press and bail to obviously keep them on their toes, show variety,
play games,
rock,
dog,
paper, and scissors, all that stuff.
Yes.
Within just 2-man, throw rock, paper, scissors in that.
Rock, paper, scissors is the best analogy ever.
It really is.
So it can be used in so many areas in so many ways.
Yeah, it really can. But that is, I was same boat with you on the matchup versus the Dolphins.
Very fair. So now we come to the main event, the number one most important Buffalo Bills storyline for 2022 from Kendall, you and myself. I'm very interested to see. I know you're not going to know what my number one is. Also, for anyone who doesn't know, just in case, we had no idea what each other's answers are before, saying them here on the show. We keep each other blind to it, so we have organic reactions and conversation. So I don't know what Kendall's going to pick. I'm very interested to see what you got.
That overlap at number 2 was a pleasant surprise.
I figured there would be.
I knew there would be one, but I didn't know.
But I knew you would have corner somewhere and somehow. I didn't know where it would be. Yeah, but we both had it at 2, albeit in a little bit of different fashions. Yeah, but I figured we'd have some kind of. I figured corner would be on both of our lists somehow, some way. But again, it all led us to this moment. Number one. Are you ready? Do you need a moment?
No.
Do you focus?
No. We got
sure?
We got
you worried?
We got it.
You scared?
Everyone relax.
A lot of pressure. The lights are bright.
Matchup-based personnel options on offense.
Oh, that's what you read it offline.
I know.
I should have known.
Okay. I know that suspense was obviously for the audience, but also for Ant, because he knew that I was going to say this without knowing I was going to say this.
That's funny.
So matchup-based personnel options on offense. It's something we've talked about all off season. Just the idea of how many different players there are on this offense, personnel-wise, that allow you to roll out 12 or even 11 personnel, but you can get to same things or different things from the same look or the same personnel. And I think the Bills have a ton of different options to do that. So this is obviously a very broad topic, and it's really, I want to focus on the running back, tight end, and slot wide receiver position each week, as I think those are the main areas that falls under this umbrella.
Which is also tied a little bit to one of your training camp storylines, which was the slot receiver battle and 12 personnel and how that usage shook out.
And this kind of is now narrowing that path, going back to the metaphor analogy.
Bring it full circle. Bring it home.
Put that ribbon on it.
Look at that. Nice bow.
So this is me narrowing the path of that storyline, where I kind of see what this offense wants to be more, and I'm envisioning Ken Dorsey wanting to use the offense in different ways, different weeks, because of all of the options he has. So I could argue that based on the opponent any given week, the Bills may decide to give Shakir the slot nod for that week, because he gives them the best plus matchup in the slot relative to that opponent, relative to their game plan that week. I can make the same argument extrapolating this to tight end too, saying you could use Morris over Sweeney this week because we want more of a receiving threat, or go vice versa. We want to have an extra blocker in this game for Josh Allen when we go into 12 personnel. So we're going to have Sweeney in this game more so as the tight end too than Morris, and Morris is going to take a back seat. And you can even throw Gilliam into this too.
Very true.
And then you also obviously extrapolate even further to running back, and you talk about, this week we want to see Moss over Cook. We don't really envision using our running backs in a receiving role all that much this week, but we know we can get marginally some of that from Zach Moss, but we want more of that power zone running from him. So we want to do that this week, or vice versa. Cook makes more sense because this team, for whatever reason, they drop 8 yards deep in this shallow area.
Which dials do you turn up and when? Just
Every
shifting and turning
single
dials.
week, just shifting those dials. Exactly. So I think the options are absolutely endless for Ken Dorsey and the offensive staff for each week. But I really wonder how much they'll lean into this or be flexible with it. Or will they stay rigid with their depth chart and usage of personnel? Because I think to this point, me and you, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you're in the same boat where we're kind of assuming it's going to be more matchup based and they're going to be multiple
1,000%.
in the regard of matchups and they're not going to be rigid to their depth chart. But who knows? Because at this point, it is the storyline. I need to see it come to fruition because to this point, we've only really seen, I guess, how the running backs appear to be used with what we saw in the preseason, especially game 2. You kind of started to see that shell of what it's going to be. But that was kind of the extent of seeing each of them live in their role and what we're going to see from them during the season. And obviously, even jumping into like this whole can of worms, if you want to get into it, even talk about who's going to be dressed as active or inactive at running back each week. That's like a whole nother layer to this conversation.
I think there's a real chance he could dress all three. Every week. They have defined roles, and they've been used that way in camp, in the scrimmage, and in preseason with their defined roles.
All it takes is like 1 or 2 guys on defense that can do 2 positions as one guy. That's all it takes. Just a couple of those, and you can afford to dress one more running back each week and still dress Tywan Jones. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. The usage, the multiplicity, but also the personnel options, seeing, what weeks do they decide to go Shakir at slot over McKenzie, or what weeks do they decide to go Crowder, all of that stuff. I think
how do they use Shakir? Like in the weeks that he gets more snaps, is it slot based or is he seeing more work at Z? Is he functioning as a run blocker in those insert looks, or is he functioning as a blocker from the slot? Like, what are you doing with
they
him?
go 12 is Shakir getting more role like that. That's all very.
Are they using Shakir? And are they in 11, but using Shakir as though he's like a quasi tight end? So you're in 11, running 11 in 12 personnel looks, getting to 12 personnel things because you have a thicker, stouter slot receiver that can function as kind of a quasi tight end based on size and strength and effort in the run blocking game.
And I think a lot of this, for me, placing this as my most important or intriguing storyline really does stem from the fact that this is a shell of the same offense, but it's under new direction with Ken Dorsey. So that's why it draws the most intrigue from me. It may not wind up being the most important thing on the impact of the season, but for me, I am the most intrigued to see how that plays out because it's the most uncertain out of all things on this team at this moment, at least for me.
That's fair. And that's honestly, that's one for me too. And it's related to my number one point in a different way. My number one is a bit more of an umbrella concept, which we're going to get to in a minute, but that's definitely one that I have my eye on. And, something I wanted to get back to, you mentioned, not potentially speaking for me, but I think you were spot on. Like I truly think, and I'm not just agreeing with you, but we're going to see a different offense week to week. We might see more 21 in this week than we did the previous 2 weeks combined. We might see more 11 personnel this week where Shakir's dominating those wide receiver 3 snaps. And the next week it's a lot of 11 again, but maybe it's McKenzie or maybe it's Crowder or maybe Quentin Morris gets more snaps than the wide receiver 3 on any given week. There was, I forget what I was listening to and who said it, but it was either a coach or a GM and was asked about, who's your wide receiver 3 on this team? And he said, like, he kind of like brushed it off and was like, it's going to be based on every week. Our wide receiver 3 this week might be our second running back, or next week it might be a tight end. The week after it might be the slot receiver. The week after that, it might be a different receiver. Like, there's so many ways to get to a multitude of things. And exactly to bring back your first point, the Bills have an option. The way I continue to like to put it is they have an option to stay in one personnel grouping. And based on the versatility of those pieces, potentially, they can access more of the menu offensively without having to change any of the personnel. What I mean by that is you can go spread. You can go power football. You can run the ball. You can use motion. You can use misdirection. You can go full spread. You can go 2x2. You can go 3x1. You can do a variety of things, and having multiple people wearing multiple hats. You can go tempo. You can stay in one personnel grouping and go no huddle and or just up tempo in general, not have to change your personnel and be able to get to more of the menu if your personnel is Diggs, Shakir, Knox, Davis, James Cook, right? Or you can still get to more of it if your personnel is Diggs, Davis, Knox, Reggie Gilliam, Devin Singletary. Like there is a multitude of avenues you can go down based on the versatility this offense has. And that's just within a game, let alone taking it from a week-to-week matchup standpoint and focusing on like, okay, this week we play this team. They're good at this. They're bad at this. How do we attack what they're bad at? And I think that's what you're going to see from this Bills offense, which is why the matchups are going to play such an important role in determining what offense we see every week. I think the Bills will have an identity. I think they're still going to be a pass-first offense. They're still going to be a Josh Allen-led offense. But the type of personnel and concepts and formations and usage rates that they have will vary week to week by the opponents, because I think they know who they are. And I think Ken Dorsey knows what he wants, but I think he's very much about the notion of, okay, we know what we're good at, but we want to be whatever the opponent struggles against. Exactly. That's what we want to do this week. If they're bad against the run, we're going to run the ball a lot this week. Oh, they're bad specifically against zone run? Zone runs all day. Oh, they're bad against gap. They're bad against duo. We're running duo. Oh, they're bad against 21. We're running 21. They're bad against 12. We're running this. Oh, they're good. They want to be a base defense and, play big nickel or third linebacker, and they struggle against 11 or 10. We're staying in 11 or 10.
There you go.
They struggle in the underneath, or they struggle in the intermediate, deep, whatever have you. I think he's going to turn and lower dials every week based on weaknesses of the opponent. And that's going to be a very exciting thing, potentially.
Get ready for an underdog plug here.
Okay.
This conversation really made me realize how much people are going to want to have stock in the Bills for best ball.
Oh, good call.
Because they're just never going to know.
Some week you're just going to have somebody blow up and it's going to win you. It's going to
James Cook is just going to go off a random week. Shakir will go off a random week. McKenzie the next. Crowder the next. It's going to be all over the place. But how are you, as a fantasy owner, how are you ever going to predict that?
No, but that's why best ball is so
sense
good.
For best ball.
You take a flyer on somebody late because maybe one week they put up 25 or 30 points for you because they get in the end zone twice. Like, ooh, I like that take. You're smart. You're smart. Well played.
I like to think I'm smart.
So you're number one, focusing on the offense and the formations and personnel and usage and all that ties into my number one. And it's something I haven't talked about a ton really on any show or even necessarily on Twitter a lot. And honestly, it came to me as I was formulating. You and I did the film room last night and we talked after about, going over some stuff for Disguised Coverage. And I told you I had a list of most important things for me already. I just hadn't decided how I was going to rank them. My number one right now, last night at that time when we spoke, I didn't have it on my list at all.
Oh,
kind of hit me today. I've kind of moved forward with it. Yeah, he gets it. Matt Kulik says, big reveal incoming. That's right. All caps.
Big,
huge reveal. Main event, moneymaker. Now I feel like I've set the bar too high and everybody's going to hear it and just be like, oh. But my number one, because the reason it's my number one is because it encompasses almost everything that we've talked about this offseason when it comes to the offense. Everything that we've talked about can be tied back to this one thing in some way or another. My number one most important Buffalo Bills storyline for 2022 is Ken Dorsey as a first-year offensive coordinator and play caller.
Okay. Yeah, I see how this relates to mine.
Yes. We've talked this offseason and in this episode, we've talked run game. We've talked personnel usage. We've talked formations and alignments. We've talked positional flexibility. We've talked gap versus zone. We've talked tempo. We've talked dictating to the defense. All of these offensive related concepts and ideas and pieces on both a micro and a macro scale. And all of them can and will either be amplified and maximized or hindered and mitigated by Ken Dorsey and his impact positively or negatively as a first-year offensive coordinator and play caller. We've got this team here in Buffalo, led by Josh Allen, with a true number one wide receiver, with a I don't even want to say budding, but potentially emerging top 25-ish wide receiver number 2 in Gabriel Davis. A potential, I would say Dawson Knox is already borderline top 10, if not already in it, but potential to be top 5. A good running back rotation, a budding, in my opinion, superstar potentially in Khalil Shakir with what he can do and what already he's showcasing. You've got a team set up overall, and especially offensively, because the offense drives this team, and really almost every team in the NFL because of the nature of the rules and how the game is played today. You've got a really strong recipe and formula offensively to win a championship this year. The Buffalo Bills are a Super Bowl favorite. That's no joke. That's no fluke. And I don't think it's being talked about enough that they've got all of these known quantities and high caliber players and position groups on the offensive side of the ball. They've got a really good combination of high floor and high ceiling individual players and position groups. And all of it is subject to the design and the whim of a person in a position in which he has never manned before in his entire career. Ken Dorsey is a first-year play caller, a first-year offensive coordinator, and he is driving a car that has been tuned and designed to win the Daytona 500 and win championships. And everything, again, we've talked about, it all comes back to that, like how he functions in play calling, how he draws up game plans, when he wants to attack, how he wants to attack it, what dials does he turn up and when and by how much? Is he turning dials from a 5 to a 10, or is it a 5 to a 6? Which ones is he lowering? When is he turning them up? Is he turning them up and lowering them drive to drive, play to play, half to half, quarter to quarter? When you break it down, there are so many intricacies and complexities to anything in the NFL, but especially being responsible for an entire side of the ball and calling the plays for it. We know the early returns are positive thus far. We are encouraged by what we've seen from Ken Dorsey. We are encouraged by what we've seen in training camp, what we've heard, what we've seen in the preseason. But once the live bullets start flying, what do you get? What do you see? It's a different animal come regular season real football. And to also push that even further, as we move further into the season, how does he adjust and counter once teams get a bead on this offense? Once there's game tape and sample size and tendency, how does he counterpunch? How does he perform in the Jedi mind tricks aspect of his role? Can he play chess at a high level week in and week out? What does he do come playoff time? We think this is the playoff team, and it should be, knock on wood. Playoffs are so matchup based, right? Everything comes down to that. Your weaknesses are amplified and exposed come playoff time. And this is a team that has Super Bowl aspirations and plays in a league where it's not series based. It's not best of 3. It's not best of 7. It's not best of 5. It's one and done. If you show up and you don't bring your best in a week in the playoffs, you're done. Even if you're the better team, even if you won that game 9 out of 10 times, it doesn't matter if you lose that one and that one is the first one. You're done. It's over. We have a first-year play caller, an offensive coordinator, commanding a ship that has been designed to win the Super Bowl. That's a huge piece. And yes, the early returns are positive and they're exciting. We like what we are hearing and seeing from Ken Dorsey, from the players, from the on-field perspective and off the field. Everything is right now, I think, trending upwards, trajectory upwards. Is it still in week 5, in week 6, in week 13, in week 14? And I think that's a huge storyline because, again, everything ties back to that. Everything that you talked about in your number one piece. Oh, who's wide receiver 3 this week? Oh, how are they functioning? Is it a James Cook week? Are all 3 running backs dressing? How much are they attacking down the field? How much play action are they going? How are they generating explosives? Like, what kind of pass protection schemes are they cooking up? And also that ties in as well, right? Like, if we can even add into that, you have such a new offensive coaching staff for an offense that is designed, for championships. Ken Dorsey is at the helm, first-year OC, first-year play caller. Aaron Kromer, new offensive line coach, seasoned veteran, but new to this team. Joe Brady, new first year with this team as the quarterback's coach. You have all these new faces and pieces that have to work together and guide this team that has championship aspirations. And there's not necessarily that holistic continuity within the staff. I think it'll be fine. But I think it's something to watch for because these coaches have never coached together before.
Mm-hmm.
Ken Dorsey has never commanded an offense before. He's never been responsible for game plans and prep work and in-game adjustments and play calling and everything. Like how do he and Joe Brady play off one another when, shit hits the fan? How do they play off of Aaron Kromer? Aaron Kromer's had success as an OC. Do we get to a point where things are clicking with the offense until Aaron Kromer has to sit him down and be like, you need to do this? Because he will. He's an assertive kind of guy. What do we see from Ken Dorsey in his role as a first-year OC and play caller? It's my number one thing. It's one of those all roads lead to Rome type of thing.
Yeah.
Every road on the offense somehow, some way comes back to Ken Dorsey. Even if you think it goes to Josh Allen's road still goes to Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey is patient zero for everything for this offense. And because this is an offensive league, because even though I'm a defensive guy, defenses still have to be built to beat the offense. Building a good offense is primary, MO number one, modus operandi. That's what you need as your function to drive a team and win a championship. And that's why it's my most important Buffalo Bills storyline for 2022.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Obviously, I don't really need to go into much detail on it, considering how well you just described all of it and the paths all leading to him, and then also how mine was part of that too.
It definitely
but
was. That's why I laughed when you picked yours.
I know, right? I knew this. But I do want to focus on a couple of things that you organically sparked in my mind. By the way, we are at 90 when he said that. It's doing the thing again.
I saw you checking something when I was speaking, and I was like, what is he reading? Okay.
Yeah.
More likes.
Give us more likes.
More. I think about that Star Wars gif of Kylo Ren where he's just like, more. It's never enough.
I am curious, you kind of sparked this in my mind, how he's going to respond to adversity specifically. I think the continuity piece, him being here before, is obviously helping him with the transition. Just knowing all the guys, knowing everyone on the team, the players, most of the coaches. I think that continuity is a massive part, and it's going to help him be more successful than he would have been otherwise early. But
I also don't want this to get confused real quick, that I don't have faith in him or aren't confident.
Yeah, you do.
But I just think it's something to watch because it's very important.
100% a very important storyline. Glad you thought of it to bring this up as number one, honestly. Very macro theme, but it draws a lot of attention. I'm very, very curious how he responds to adversity specifically, because you talked about how much responsibility he has over everything this year. Everything, like you said, funnels back to him. So when the Bills lose a game early, which they probably will do because the schedule is tough early on and he's a new offensive coordinator, I'm expecting a loss somewhere early in the season. How is he going to respond to that adversity? And is he going to take proper accountability? Because he is that dude now, how is he going to respond to that? And how is he going to reflect that accountability onto the rest of the staff and the rest of his players that play for him? Is he going to take the ownership for the shortcomings and explain things, how they could be better? All of those little things to improve and grow on, like Sean McDermott always says, there's no losing, there's only learning. Stuff like that. How is he going to respond to that first loss when he has to take responsibility for it? And he is that head honcho that has to take responsibility for any offensive shortcomings. Yeah, that is, I'm really going to be focused on that now that you bring this up as this grand macro idea. That is the micro that I'm going to be focusing on within that. I think that'll be an interesting little subsect of that.
I think this, again, I mentioned earlier, Matthew Kulik is on fire tonight. I think this is also a really interesting question as well. He says, so with a first-time play caller, does he defer to what Josh wants, given that he's battle-tested? Does he give Josh more freedom to run the show? I think that's also something that I'm not necessarily worried about, because as Josh's quarterbacks coach the last several years, that relationship is so tight. And just to kind of give some insight too, usually your position coach is the one that you go to vent. So if Allen had Allen and Dable were close, but usually for quarterbacks and their quarterback coach, you have your install and you have the meeting, you're just yeah. And then you go into the quarterback coach. Yeah. You're just I hate that game plan. This is terrible. Blah, blah, blah. They have a good rapport. They know each other, so I'm not worried about how they play off one another. But I think this is a good question, because Like if push comes to shove, does Dorsey just defer to Josh or does he
Mhm.
maintain the reins? Like, I think it's also a nice potential safety net to know that you've
Mm.
got a quarterback who knows what he wants, knows what he likes, is very cerebral. He's very intelligent. And we know that from a multitude of reports, but even when you see it, you can see how he progresses and how he goes through his progressions and his reads on the field, especially with the type of progression passing that the Bills have. Josh Allen's a very smart player and a very smart quarterback. And then you add in the little things like all the checks and the alerts and how he reads things pre-snap and how he adjusts post-snap. Josh is very smart. I think that's also a really good, safety net or, break glass in case of emergency option that you can defer to somebody who knows what he wants called, but how those two play off of one another, I think is something to watch. Again, not in a negative way, but just something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
Like, we know Dable was an experienced play caller. Josh and Dable had their in-game rapport when things were going good, when things were not, when things were neutral. We haven't seen all that happen yet with Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen. So I think we're going to see a lot of I think the rapport has been established, but we're going to see the execution piece and the working relationship, how it forms and how it functions as the season progresses. I don't think we have an answer to this question right now. You can answer it based on what you want or what you think Dorsey or Allen should do. That's a very good thought-provoking question. I think we'll see. I think that's one of those like time will tell.
Yeah.
2 super chats. One from 13, who just comes in with just straight up super chat donation, which is awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here, your questions and engagement in the chat, and then the donation. Thank you very much. And then John, thank you very much for being here, John, and for the super chat. I mean, I never know what John is going to say, but I'm always excited with the comments.
You always know you got to read it like a monologue type of thing. And
Yes. John comes through and he says, this is funny. Josh is Godzilla and the NFL is Tokyo. Expect 38-2 Dorsey to be hyper aggressive. That's in reference to Ken Dorsey being 38-2 as a starter at the University of Miami. Shout out to the U, which I am a big fan of, which everybody should know. So expect 38-2 Dorsey to be hyper aggressive. No more 4th and 1 and 4th and 2 punts. Waited 25 years for JA-17. Unleash him. Attack. Bills fans will be okay with that. Win or lose. Awesome.
It's funny.
Comment.
It's funny he says this because you kind of think back to the Tennessee game of going for it and slipping on that QB sneak. And I'm pretty sure a lot of Bills fans weren't necessarily okay with going for it, win or lose. But I 100% agree with this sentiment from John. Go for it, attack, use your weapons. You just got to be okay with the outcome and understand that the risk that's being involved with that.
I think with like so many things being too like aggressive, it's a catch-22 with everything. But like when it executes, it's like, what a gutsy call. Amazing. And when it doesn't, it's like, what a dumb call. That team is stupid.
Yes. Shot in basketball.
Exactly. The only thing that still bothers me about that QB sneak, I really like Jeffrey Simmons. I think he's a phenomenal player.
He's a beast.
I hate how much credit he gets for getting that stop because Josh fell. Josh slipped and fell. But people are like, Jeffrey Simmons blew this play up. I'm like, he executed. He made a good play. Josh fell. Yeah. Josh slipped before Jeffrey Simmons even did anything. So let's pump the brakes.
Well, I mean, Chris Broussard will tell you that it was Taylor Lewan's fault.
Oh, that's he's barely even in the basketball world now. He doesn't even know football. Like, it's not even
put him in there, to call it back. I don't know.
That's fair. I like that. Well done. Deflect. Let's not talk about the sadness of that loss. Let's deflect and throw shade at someone else. But this is a good comment from John. I think it's something, again, we've alluded to in this episode, but we've talked about holistically this offseason. Like Ken Dorsey, actually, we just talked about it a little bit ago. Like, Ken Dorsey is going to want to, from what we've seen and what we've heard, he wants to attack where you are vulnerable. So if you've got a bum ankle, he's going to try and rip that ankle off. He's not going to keep, hitting you up high or going at your torso. He sees you have a weak ankle, he's going for that ankle. He smells blood in the water, he's going for where the wound is. And whatever that means, whatever that takes, is what he's going to do. I think he is, an aggressive and attack-minded guy, just based on what we've seen, what we've heard. I'm very interested to see, especially because of the variety of opponents the Bills have, especially early on in the year. We're going to get a nice little flavor of what Ken Dorsey's going to bring. Are we going to see the same thing? Because if we see the same thing week in and week out, okay, he's just going to stick with their identity. It is what it is. But if we see it varied, that's very indicative of what we could see all year. Because again, the Bills are going to see or we're opening up right up with the Rams. This team that's been kind of at the forefront of the too high, light box, tight front combination. And then you go the next week to Tennessee, who everybody's studying their simulated pressure looks because of what they did last year and how successful they were. And they have a stud safety, and they have two studs in my mind up front with Simmons and Landry. And then they've got Bud Dupree, and I like their corners. If Caleb Farley's healthy, he's good. They got my boy Roger McCreary over there as well.
Christian Fulton could come out of the woodworks.
And then you go Miami. Cover zero, blitz you all day, man coverage. What are you going to do? See what's up. Then you go up against Baltimore, who is healthy and reinforced and might be throwing a ton of 3 safety looks at you and might be throwing a ton of dime. All of these concepts and schemes defensively that I bring up to say pivot. You have to pivot, because each one of those teams, their identity and their philosophy defensively means you have to attack them differently than the others on a week-to-week basis in order to be successful. So we're going to see it early, and then it's going to be interesting to see what you get going forward once teams start to see, okay, on third downs, on third and short, they like to do this. On third and long, they like to do this. When they're up, they like to do this. If they lose yardage on first down, here's what they like to do on second down. Against a team that goes light boxes, they like to do this. X, Y, and Z, personnel, tendencies, everything. It's going to be very intriguing. But I think at the core of all of it, you're going to see an attack-minded Ken Dorsey and a matchup-dependent offense because of that attack-mindedness. When you're attack-focused, you're focusing on your opponent's weakness and how you can expose their vulnerabilities, and that screams attack. And I agree. And I'm very excited for that potential. That was a really good comment as we start to change the banner and wind down on this episode of Disguised Coverage. I want to thank everyone who joined us here live for tonight's show. If you are still here and you haven't dropped a like already, please drop a like. I know it's corny, but it goes a long way towards helping us to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. Again, especially if you enjoyed this episode. If you are listening later or watching later, please drop a like on this as well. If you are listening on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review this episode, this show, whatever you want to focus on, macro or micro, anything like that. I see all the positive comments coming through, and I appreciate all of them. A couple of them that made me laugh. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I like this one a lot.
Toodles. That's my favorite part. I love putting up the toodles. It's just such a good way. Just such a good thing. I like the I love y'all boys. That's a good one. Yeah, this episode was fantastic, and any appreciation you folks can show on the back end towards, helping it to reach more eyes and ears is greatly appreciated. And however your view came, your listen came, your download came, whatever have you, is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. I want to answer this question. I was going to bring it up at the end. RJ says, does Disguise Coverage have a new day next week? Disguise Coverage will be live next Tuesday at 7 p.m. instead of Wednesday, because AEW Dynamite is in Buffalo next Wednesday, and I'm going to AEW Dynamite on Wednesday, which means I had to switch Disguise Coverage. So Disguise Coverage will be on Tuesday live, 7 p.m. instead of Wednesday, 7 p.m. So I'm double dutying next Tuesday. Got Disguise Coverage at 7 p.m. and then we have the Cover One Film Room live at 9 p.m. So it's a busy day for me next Tuesday. But yes, great point, RJ. I was going to mention at the end, but Disguise Coverage will be live next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. The following week, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled time of live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Yes, but thank you to everyone who tuned in live for this episode. If you didn't tune in live, you watched later, listened later, whatever have you, thank you so much for your view, your listening, your download. Please drop a like. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguised Coverage. It is tremendously appreciated. It helps the show to go a long way and the channel to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears as you approach fantasy football season, which we are in full thrall and full swing of right now. Download the Underdog Fantasy app or go to Underdog Fantasy, the website. Sign up or download the app, whatever have you. And when you do, use promo code COVER1. That's cover and the number 1. You can see it on the screen here, or if you are listening, go into the episode show notes. You'll see what the promo code is. It's cover and the number 1. Use that promo code and get yourself up to a free $100 from Underdog. When you download the Underdog Fantasy app or sign up and use that promo code COVER1, Underdog will match your first deposit up to $100. Kendall mentioned best ball. I've gotten into that over the last couple of years, and it's really because of Underdog. I just like how their drafts flow. I like the user interface. I like all the different options and games and variety of wagers you can put, and the prizes and the fashions and the form and just everything. Underdog is holistic and fantastic. And it's a nice way to also play fantasy and not stress out with lineup decisions every week, because it's best ball. You don't have to worry about that. So download Underdog or sign up, use that promo code COVER1. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us live, listening live, watching later, listening later, whatever have you. And also big time thank you to Kendall Mirsky, who has been a huge piece of this show this entire offseason, whether it was draft prep, whether it was post-draft, whether it was training camp pieces and matchup focuses. And yes, Justin says Kendall is a legend. Kendall is a legend. Yes, there is not enough time for me to give you all the props you deserve for how you've crushed it this offseason. And I thought this episode was a perfect way to
really tied the bow nicely on the offseason.
Yes. Yeah, you've been a star on the show and in the film room as well. But we've had a lot of very interesting conversations, and I thought it was perfect to, you've been double dutying it every week these last several weeks with the film room and being here as we've wrapped up all these concepts and ideas. And yeah, you crushed it. Maybe we'll see you, on the trail come regular season time as we start to move through some things. Also, maybe a little interesting nugget. Kendall and I will also be part of a new show that's coming to the network on week 1, NFL Sunday. More to come on Twitter, more to come next week, but you'll be seeing a lot more of Kendall and I on this channel, potentially on this show, definitely in the Cover One film room, but also on this new show. That's all I'm going to say about it. Very excited. Kendall, you crushed it. You were fantastic. Everybody in the live chat, thank you so much again for your presence, your time, your kind words, super chats, engagement in general, whatever have you. If you like this episode, if you like the show, please tell all your family and friends and loved ones about it. Suggest it to them. Again, more eyes and ears, more traction. If you hated this show, if you hated this episode, if you thought I was just too handsome and Kendall was just awful, tell your enemies about this show and this episode. Try and ruin their day, their week, their life. Because a view is a view, a listen is a listen. Appreciate all of you folks. I will see you next week for a special Tuesday episode of Disguise Coverage, live next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 2 days before the Bills kick off against the Los Angeles Rams. It's an exciting time. I could not have done it without Kendall in this episode or majority of this offseason. So again, major kudos and shout out to you. Thank you all,
of course,
everyone. We hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well, staying safe, taking care of one another. Be kind to one another. I'll see you next week. And as always, go Bills.